This is the financial crisis made easy. A load of banks in America invested, unluckily, about $1 trillion they didn't have. Now America is faced with a choice. You can bail out the banks, which basically means you give about $1 trillion to the banks to keep them solvent, or you can let capitalism take its majestic course with the deregulated markets.
If you're a regular viewer of my channel, you know how much I love Thunderfoot's videos. I believe that absolutely everyone should be subscribed to his channel. However, no one is immune to being wrong, and no one is insulated from skeptical examination when they say something stupid like this. Let's take the second part first, the so-called deregulated markets. He's clearly trying to blame capitalism, the free market, and say that as a solution it will be destructive. This is operating under the misapprehension that when government deregulates a market, they actually get rid of regulations. Not so, as we saw when the new regulations in the deregulated power market in California led to shortages and rolling blackouts. In fact, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are government-sponsored organizations. Fannie Mae was created by FDR with the promise of avoiding this very sort of crisis in the mortgage market. Freddie Mac was created in 1970 to do the same for the secondary mortgage market. They and the Federal Home Loan Banks were making all of these loans to try and meet the goals of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, created by Lyndon Johnson. This was a Democrat-led plan to make homes affordable by people who couldn't otherwise get them, which leads me to his other claim. They invested, unluckily, with money they didn't have. But the question he doesn't examine is, why? The answer has everything to do with federal policy. For years, the policy of the Federal Reserve, which Congress is in complete 100% control of, by the way, has been to stimulate the economy by lowering interest rates. How do you think that happens? Do you really think they just speak and it is so? Wave a magic wand? Pray really, really hard? The way they lower interest rates is by increasing the supply of loanable funds. If you've even taken a basic economics class, you know about the supply-demand graph. Well, it works in the lending markets too, only the price is the interest rate, and the quantity is the amount of money being loaned out. When the Fed decides that it wants to lower interest rates, it announces to its member banks that it will buy bonds. Banks may sell off bonds they're already holding, or more likely, they'll just make new bonds, essentially created out of thin air. To pay for them, upon receiving the bonds, the Fed goes into their computers and increases the bank's reserves by the appropriate amount, essentially creating money out of thin air. This increases the supply and causes the supply curve to shift to the right, lowering interest rates and increasing the amount of funds lent out. This decreases the risk of investments for the banks and leaves them having to find extra borrowers to lend the new money to. It's an economic reality that people take fewer risks with more expensive purchases. So it should come as no surprise that with cheaper money that they really didn't have to do anything to earn, the inevitable result is these unlucky investments. We've seen it before countless times with the dot bomb, the S&L crisis, and many other times going back to and including the Great Depression.
This means that the banks will fold, which will probably mean a Great Depression-style crash.
Actually, yes, but not in the way he thinks it is. He's obviously blaming capitalism for the Great Depression, but in reality, it was this very same unwise federal policy which caused the boom of the Roaring Twenties to go bust. Same story now as then. By the way, there was a crash in 1921 that was far worse than the one in 1929. The Harding administration took a hands-off approach, and the economy recovered in less than a year.
If the banks go bust, they will take many of the small and medium businesses who are reliant on the banks for loans, financial support, storage, etc. with them.
Not so. This bailout, whether appropriated by Congress through tax money or by the Federal Reserve with new money, will take money away from the small and medium businesses, as well as working American families, not to mention the poor, in the form of more inflation. In fact, policies like this are exactly why the misery index is at its highest rate of increase since 1980.
This will put a disproportionate number of people out of work, which means these jobless folk cannot spend the money that they're not earning, and the whole economy spirals into recession.
Ah! The sky is falling! The sky is falling! Drug dealers are selling meth that looks like Pop Rocks! Iraq has WMDs! Vaccines are causing autism! Hey, he might as well be saying that. He has just as much justification for it. None at all.
It may be useful at this point to reflect on how the US markets came to be in this position. Put simply, lack of regulation.
Completely ridiculous. The financial market is arguably the most regulated market in America, even more so than healthcare. Why do liberals always take problems with their failed socialist policies and try to blame the free market for them? The reason why the market forces work so well is that companies pay the price for bad decisions, and that is what should happen to these mortgage companies. But with a government there to bail them out, they have no incentive to avoid these bad decisions, since they get out of paying the consequences, just like the S&L crisis. By the way, speaking of the S&L crisis, am I the only one who remembers that McCain was one of the Keating Five? Look it up.
Basically, the regulators are an insurance against this sort of thing.
No, the regulators caused it.
If you don't bail out the markets, it will be hard for America for the next few years. Expect a big depression.
Only expect a big depression if the government tries to fix it.
This is reaping the economic disaster that was sown by market deregulation. The market deregulation that has been so strongly supported by Bush and McCain.
Not so. The real cause of this crisis, the monkeying around with the money supply and interest rates, was supported by Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, John McCain, and practically every other Republican and Democrat in Washington with the exception of Ron Paul. There was no deregulation, only additional regulations that the government called a deregulation, as they always do. Thunderfoot should put the same amount of research into economics as he does into evolution and other issues. If he does, he will see that the things he's being told is just as much a load of crap as creationism, instead of having to find himself on the receiving end of a debunking from a fellow skeptic.